Chapter 1139, the final chapter of this insane 4-in-a-row stretch. There's a break next week, but this is arguably one of the most deserved breaks in the recent history of the story, or at least as far back as I can remember, which to be honest isn't very far, and it probably won't even feel like a break because there's so much to talk about. Last week's chapter is obviously going to dominate those discussions, and rightfully so. It was the biggest chapter in the entire story, especially in terms of the bigger picture, but narrowing our focus to the near future of this elbaf arc, this chapter 1139. It's only 13 pages long, which again is completely understandable, but it holds its own significance. You know, the way I'm talking following last week, it sounds like this chapter is distinctly average, but it's not. But that's how you know that this has been an insane stretch. The cover story for this chapter has Who's Who plotting to kill Page 1 and Ulti, so the other members of the Tobiropo are still around, some of them at least, so maybe the other members are somewhere in the country doing something. There's two shadowy figures, but they're clearly Ulti and Page 1, and I guess these two didn't want to work under him, so now he's going to take care of business. And it's clear now Who's Who is 100% going down his own path. He's shedding his identity as a member of the Beast Pirates completely, it looks like, and I guess he's taking out any other potential threats to his new operation, new business, whatever this is. Ulti and Page 1 are the two members of the Tobiropo I'm the most interested in because of the little information we have about their past. Their father was a pirate who knew Kaido, and when he died, Kaido took the two of them in. My idea is that their father could have served on the Rocks Pirates because that's really the only time, I feel at least, where Kaido would have worked, quote, worked with other pirates, so this guy would have been at God Valley as well, potentially. And this serves as some solid reasoning for why they wouldn't want to work under Who's Who, because they probably see it as him betraying the Beast Pirates, betraying Kaido, or something like that, even though Kaido isn't around anymore. Because based on their past, Kaido is basically their adoptive father, who's taken care of them since their biological father died, so they owe everything to him. And we know Kaido is very brutal, but he treats his direct subordinates really well. Like, forget the fodder, the 10,000 however many smiles, gifters, Beast Pirates, you know, focusing on the upper ranks. Like, we've seen his relationship with King and how close they are. We see him getting involved in Jack's fight against Nekomamushi and Inuarashi because he didn't want Jack to get hurt anymore, and he didn't blame him for losing the fight either. He made a point to say Jack was still strong, so he did have that kind of softer side to him, I guess. And I'm sure that extended to the Tobiropo as well, especially Ulti and Page 1, so he did look after them. But back to the actual cover, I think this is Who's Who trying to carve out a place for himself after Kaido left a massive power vacuum which eventually Yamato is going to shut down. And so it is a short chapter. The entirety of it is almost dedicated to the one group who are inside the castle, but more specifically it's dedicated to the mystery man who appears, but we'll get to that in a bit. In the castle, the group comes across the throne room and sees the summoning circle on the ground. I'd always assumed it would disappear after being used, but I guess not. So with that, what if it doesn't disappear because the summoning circle has been used before, so this castle is now marked, so to speak, like with Minato in Naruto, how he can mark something and teleport to it. What if it's something similar here? Someone marked it in the past, but then that begs the question, what was it used for previously? Who used it previously? Or maybe it could be that the circle just stays there until they go back to where they came from and then it will disappear. It's also almost certain now that whoever Gunko's calling for backup will show up through that same circle, and Naomi says she's seen them in books before and that it's a ritual in other countries, so it's looking like the place Brook was sent during the time skip does have some sort of connection to this. So I can imagine a scenario where that same tribe possibly saw an actual summoning occur, and after that they just base their entire identities around it. Maybe during the Void Century they saw someone like the Elders getting summoned, and since then they've tried to replicate it for their own reasons, although it would obviously never work because they don't actually have the power. And now the mystery man shows up in dramatic fashion. He throws his axe at Road and is sitting on the throne, and it is Scopper Gaban. And on top of that, he is the man marked by flames. He has the same hair and glasses as we've known him to have during the flashback, but with a very nice looking beard now with a braid down the center, and most importantly a flame-shaped scar on his head. So we now know the man who stands in the way of anyone getting the Laugh Tale, because if the rumors are to be believed, he has the final road poneglyph. What's not clear though is where he's keeping it and how he creates whirlpools around him on his pitch black ship. Based on this, my guess guess is he goes out to sea on that same ship every so often to stop people who are getting too close, to keep his secret and the secret of the road poneglyph under wraps. But again, what's the deal with the whirlpools? And we know Gaban travels outside of this as well because he met Crocus, that cover story page. I do wonder how he got there though, because would he have sailed that pitch black ship all the way around the world because Reverse Mountain's right at the start of the Grand Line? And if he did that, would he have stopped at Sabaody and seen Rayleigh, at which point he would have talked to Crocus, Shanks and Rayleigh, and from all three of them he could have heard about Luffy? Or could he have gone with Oimo and Kashi when they went to pick up Dory and Broggy, and he asked them if they could make a little pit stop at Reverse Mountain so he can catch up with an old friend? Or could it be that since the Roger Pirates did get to Loftail at the end of the Grand Line, they found a way to go underneath the Red Line under Reverse Mountain to get to the Twin Capes on the other side, because the start and end of the Grand Line are essentially right next to each other except for that massive red wall that no one can get through. What if on Loftail they discovered a way to get through it? And that's how Gaban visited Crocus. You know, it's a much shorter journey. Also, his title card presents him using the name Yasan. I initially thought that this was an alias Gaban was using to hide his identity because he is protecting the final road poneglyph. He wouldn't want to draw any eyes to him, especially given what he is safeguarding. But there's a note at the end of the chapter about Gaban's name, how Viz writes it as Gaban, but when it's actually romanized it should be spelled Gyaban, which you can actually notice in the anime as well when Roger says his name. So Yasan is just a simple nickname. Take the Ya from Gyaban. This man also calls himself the Missionary of Love. And you know what? No one can deny it because we know who he's with. We know what he's achieved, whatever methods he used. Actions or words, they worked, so he isn't lying when he says that. Although going from the King of the Pirates to the Dark King to the Minister of Love is really funny. And there's definitely people out there who have compared these three to the monster trio, Luffy, Zoro, Sanji, even before this chapter was released. And this new title that Gaban's given himself is definitely gonna fuel those comparisons. Road explains that he is Ripley's husband to Nami's confusion, and he talks about the other hybrid races in the world, and he brings up the Buccaneers. I thought the Buccaneers were directly descended from the giants, you know, like some evolutionary tree. But since he's mentioning them here, does that mean Buccaneers are a mix of the giants and one other species? And if they are, I would say that species would be the Lunarians. I'm only going off of the skin color really. Maybe a giant and a Lunarian got together in ancient times and both species blood is so strong, so rich that it just created a new species. You know, over time neither of their blood got diluted, thus you have the Buccaneers. But back to the whole love thing, Gaban also says love is freedom, to which Luffy responds to by saying this is what Sanji will be like in the future. This chapter made me laugh a lot. But here's the thing, the title of this chapter is The Mountain Eater, and here I am wondering what part of the chapter this equates to. It's explained later how Gaban got the name, but before getting to that part of the chapter I thought it was talking about Gaban but in a different sense, who married Ripley, was able to have a child with her, so calling Gaban the Mountain Eater with all the implications and innuendos that come from that. So Oda didn't mean for this interpretation of the title, obviously. I mean, maybe he did, but I'm 99% sure that he didn't. But even so, it's one of the funniest things I've heard all year. But going back in time a bit, where Kid arrived on the shores of Elbaf to challenge Shanks, who was drinking in a bar at a port. Shanks said that he lost track of time because he came across old friends that he thought were dead, and everyone thought he was talking about Dory and Broggy, who were themselves reintroduced in that very chapter. So I guess it was believed Shanks had met them on Little Garden, and he might have thought that they had killed each other during their duel, sometime in between when he first met them and now, this moment. So there's a lot of assumptions that have to be made to get to that conclusion, but it all makes sense. He might have been talking about Gaban the entire time. After Roger's execution, Gaban could have gone off the radar almost instantly and went to Elbaf, and with his title card calling him Yasan, if he has been going by that name, then there would be no link between Elbaf and the name Scopper Gaban. So there would be no news on his whereabouts as compared to Rayleigh, who was casually selling himself into slavery on Sabaody. We know now, thanks to Oimo, that he has been here for over 20 years, so maybe he did go straight to Elbaf after Roger's execution, and this means he was there for the entire Loki Harald situation, as well as for when Shanks brought Loki back to the island 6 years ago. So they could have possibly seen each other then, but Gaban would have also been an old man at that time as well, so it's not too much of a stretch to think that Shanks might have thought he died. It's a bit morbid, but possible. The phrase that Shanks says being plural may mean otherwise, pluralize, as in he says friends plural. So maybe there's someone else here as well, or maybe it's just the phrasing that he happened to use and Gaban really is just the only person he was talking about. And if it was Gaban, then I want to know what they talked about together. Aside from catching up, did Shanks tell him about Luffy and that's why Gaban was waiting on the shores of the country waiting for the Straw Hats to show up? Because he was anticipating their arrival. We know he told Rayleigh about Luffy and how he said the same words as their captain. So that would be the dream that Roger had and Luffy now has. So I'm sure he would have told Gaban the same thing as well. And the topic switches to Loki with Gaban giving strong warnings and cautions about what freeing him could mean, although Luffy and Zoro end up ignoring him. But again, the comparisons and parallels are there. We get a small flashback with Roger, Rayleigh and Gaban where Roger isn't listening to their words. They're silhouetted as if everyone hasn't figured out that this is Scopper Gaban. But anyway, I don't care how on the nose it is or how obvious it is, I love to see these similarities. Back in the village, back to the party, and here is where we get Oimo explaining to Usopp and the other Straw Hats there about the whole Scopper Gaban situation and how he lives on the island. I'm gonna combine this part of the chapter and the bit at the end into one here just to keep everything that Oimo is saying together. He tells a story about how Gaban defeated hundreds of enemies to a hospital in the mountains, so that's how he got the name Mountain Eater, not whatever I was saying before. He also calls him the left-hand man of the king of the pirates, and it looks like Gaban's been building his name up even after retirement because according to them, he's a legendary figure on par with Roger and Rayleigh. So first, the left-hand man thing, I'm sure that makes Gaban the first character in the story to be officially, like directly called a left-hand man. Like there's many characters who you can assume are the left-hand man, like Queen on the Beast Pirates, Lucky Roo or Yasop on the Redhead Pirates, and so on and so forth. But none of them I think have been explicitly called the left-hand man. So this is going to make a lot of people happy. A lot of agendas are going to be fueled by these words. And as for the second thing they say about Gaban, he's a legendary figure. Yep, I would agree with that. He's a heavy hitter from the King of the Pirates crew. That shouldn't set anyone off. That shouldn't piss anyone off. The other part, equal to Roger and Rayleigh. This statement, while strength is obviously going to be a factor here, is definitely taking into account notoriety as well, you know. But I am also sure his strength is comparable to Rayleigh's, if not equal to Rayleigh's, but not Roger's. I guess it is kind of crazy to say that anyone has a legendary status on the level with the King of the Pirates, the most legendary figure of them all. I guess it's more of a thing to say that whenever Roger showed up, Gaban and Rayleigh were always by his side, you know. They were the wings of the Pirate King. Now back in the castle, Gaban reveals a secret treasure room that is empty aside from a single key, the key to Loki's chains, and he talks about how thieves stole everything except for that because even those kinds of people don't want to see Loki freed or liberated. This leads back to what I was talking about before about what events and incidents he was present for. I think Gaban must have been there for the whole Loki thing and especially his imprisonment, and maybe that's where Colin's words about his father come from, about him not fearing the giants. Maybe Gaban stood up to Loki or something. This would be after he killed everyone in the castle. Maybe he was trying to go out to sea and Gaban confronted him. To the end of the chapter, Gaban makes a big declaration regarding the fate of this key. If Luffy wants it, he'll have to fight him for it. And once more, this links back to the idea that Shanks told Gaban about Luffy when he was on Elbaf, either now or 6 years ago, or maybe both times. 6 years ago, he told Gaban about much. He reminded him of Roger, and now just before the present, before he fought Kid, he told Gaban that Luffy will show up soon. Because it's not just anyone who'll be given a challenge in exchange for freeing the country's greatest calamity. This is obviously a test Gaban has come up with himself, I would say, testing Luffy after everything he'd heard from Shanks, as well as now seeing Luffy face to face and understanding what Shanks told him. He's made the decision to actively reveal the key to them. He wouldn't have done that if he didn't believe in what he was told about Luffy, or if Loki was a purely evil individual. So that's another point in favor of Loki not being the villain everyone has made him out to be, because if he really was the big bad prince he's been built up as, then no one would struggle with the idea of freeing him, especially not Shanks or Gaban, who for all we know might know more about the actual situation than any of the other giants do, excluding Yarl, although even then I've seen the idea floating around that he has his own secret ploy, since he was the only one who survived the massacre in the castle, meaning there's no one else who can corroborate his story, so he could have said whatever helped his potential plan out the most. In this short time I have really come to like Yarl as a character, his position in this arc where he's not quite a wise old man, you know, like he seems a bit clumsy maybe, but he he's still heavily respected, and add to that his gag with the sword that I really enjoy as well. He could be the mastermind behind everything, and the whole sword through his head thing could be a part of that ploy. And there's the whole thing with Harald, how he got major pushback from the elders, and Jarl is the elder, and as former captain of the warmongering giant warrior pirates, he would have definitely had his own bone to pick with King Harald. But back to Gaban, I threw out the idea of him possibly confronting Loki after the incident. If he did, then that could have given him a better insight into what the truth is without him being told explicitly what the truth is. But at the same time, and I have to remind myself of this whenever I talk about Loki, but we were told he terrorized his village and also caused chaos out at sea, so even though those things are almost certainly missing major context, he still has to answer for that. And another thing is that I wonder if he told Shanks anything when he was captured. Maybe he tried to explain the situation, but Shanks couldn't take any risks, so he still took him back. But he also told Gaban to keep an eye out, watch over Loki just in case there's any truth to his words. Or maybe he told Gaban, let Luffy decide when he shows up. But Loki himself wouldn't know about any of this, so from his perspective, Shanks simply caught him and aided in imprisoning him, which is why he hates him. There's many layers that we know are there but have yet to be revealed, and there's probably even more layers that we still don't know about at all. But as for how this fight between Luffy and Gaban is gonna go down, I think Gaban is gonna give him a good fight, in the sense that even in his old age he's retained some of his strength like Garp has or really has, so it will be a good brawl. And I mean, he offers the fight while we have Oimo hyping him up in the background to the nth degree. That said, if Luffy was to go all out Gear 5 and everything, then Gaban doesn't stand a chance. And I really want Luffy to go Gear 5 in this fight to see how Gaban reacts to it, because Gaban knows the truth about everything, absolutely everything, so his reaction and response to seeing Gear 5 would be more telling than anyone else's. After seeing it, what will he have to say? What information will he have to give? Even though Luffy will have zero interest in any of it, could it potentially lead to a mini flashback where obviously the One Piece treasure and Laugh Tale won't be revealed, but we see Roger's reaction to learning about Nika and his abilities, because Nika and that power isn't a secret anymore, you know. So seeing something like that, I don't think is too crazy. Maybe something like the small flashback we got in this chapter. Well, a bit more than that, hopefully. But cut back to the present and we see Gaban's reaction where he's thinking, this is the guy we learned about, that the world has been waiting for this entire time. The reason why they were too early is because this guy hadn't shown up yet, but now he's here. If Gaban were to see Luffy in Gear 5, then he should completely understand what that means and how important it is. And now as for where I think the story will go from here, I think that this fight will happen, and then after the fight is done, maybe Gaban hands over the key to Luffy, or is about to hand over the key, or maybe we're still in the middle of the fight and through the summoning circle comes that other member of the Holy Knights that Gunko called. So we'll have Gaban, Luffy, everyone, and this new Holy Knight member in the same vicinity, which I think will lead into us having to deal with the Holy Knights first before having to go free Loki, which means Loki's freedom has been postponed again. But that just means the moment where he is free from his chains, it will be an amazing moment.